AI Mentors is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our podcast, AI Mentors, brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI Mentors cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career.
You're listening to AI Mentors. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Doug Laney. Doug is Principal for Data and Analytics Strategy at Caserta. He is also a best-selling author for his book, Infonomics. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, JP. Great to be with you.
Our pleasure. Doug, let's start with a little bit of background of yourself, how you first got involved in technology, and what's been your journey taking us up to your current role at Caserta.
Well, I guess going way back, I was into photography. My father and I built a dark room, and I used to spend 4 nights a week in there developing photographs and experimenting with different kinds of techniques. Then one day when I was about 13 years old, he came home with a computer, a vector graphic MZ CPM machine. And I found it to be a much more creative, powerful creativity tool. And that was kind of started my interest in computing. I went to the University of Illinois as a math and computer science undergraduate, and quickly realized that I was more interested in the business aspects of computing than the math. And at the time, there was no business-oriented MIS kind of curriculum at Illinois, so I designed my own curriculum and ended up getting a degree in software engineering and business administration. I was hired by Anderson Consulting well before it was Accenture, and cut my teeth there. Then got into some startups in the AI and natural language space, kind of the first instantiation of the commercial activities in that industry back in the late 80s and early 90s, which led to me finding my way, following a colleague, into one of the first data warehouse companies, Prism Solutions, which was formed by Bill Inman, who is known as the father of the data warehouse concept. And I ran part of the consulting organization in the US, and then moved down to Australia and ran it for the Asia Pacific region. I started to do some writing on the topic. I've always enjoyed writing. And in fact, the only classes that I ever got A's in were ones that had a written component to them. So I started writing for some journals and speaking at some conferences, and got noticed by Gartner, the IT research and advisory firm, and spent 5 years there as an analyst, focusing on emerging technologies and trends. Then decided to start my own business called EvalueBase, where we were compiling user-based evaluations of technologies and making them available for all sorts of analytics. And then I ended up going back to Gartner after a short stint with Deloitte, where I set up the Analytics Institute and co-managed it. Back at Gartner, I was really given the opportunity to develop some of these Infonomics ideas around treating and thinking about information as an actual corporate asset, which led to authoring the book. And then I realized I really wanted to go back into consulting to kind of put some of these ideas about how to monetize and manage and measure information into practice for companies. So that's what I'm doing now with the boutique data and analytics consulting firm Caserta, based in New York City. But I'm in Chicago.
Well, yeah. Thank you for that, Doug. Really, really appreciate the overview. I definitely want to spend some time talking about the origins behind the idea for the book, Infonomics, what you learned from it in the process of writing the book. But sticking on your current role at Caserta, so could you give us some insight into what your role involves, principle of data analytics strategy?
So Caserta has been in business for about 20 years and is specialized in and is one of the better known boutique kind of white glove concierge consultancies in building data warehouses and data marts and data lakes and doing cloud migration and complex data architecture kinds of solutions. I got to speaking to the founder, Joe Caserta, and he was interested in launching an analytics practice, a strategy practice as well. And so it seemed like a natural thing a natural fit. So my focus is more on helping companies develop and implement their data strategies, which would include everything from data governance initiatives to setting up analytic centers of excellence, to introducing data governance organizations and the role of the chief data officer or chief analytics officer, to helping them monetize their data, identify ways to generate new value streams from their information, deal with programs around data literacy or fluency to kind of bring along the entire business when it comes to using data much more handily. We also developed a new maturity model that takes into account both data and analytics maturity, over 200 distinct indicators of maturity that we use to help clients understand where are their not only their weaknesses, but what kind of strengths they have to capitalize on. And then another part of Infonomics involves valuing data. So we've introduced a process called data diligence, and we work with private equity firms and others who are involved in corporate transactions to help them understand the value, actual and latent value in a potential acquiree's data assets.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
So obviously a vast majority of your time is spent working with C-suite executives, particularly chief data officers, ranging across different industries, which you've covered in that overview. What are the most popular topics? What are the most common threads that you're helping organizations with right now?
Well, right now, due to the pandemic, many companies are struggling to better understand how their business models are shifting, how to become more digital, and how to upgrade their forecasting and analytic abilities from mostly trend-based analytics, where you're really kind of only looking at your own historical trends, to more what's called driver-based analytics that look more outwardly at what are the leading indicators of your own business, looking externally at external data sources from suppliers and partners or ancillary industries. And so most companies have really not done a great job of looking externally at leading indicators of their business, and really have kind of been just staring at their own navels when it comes to tracking their own business. And so we're working with them to identify what kinds of external data assets are valuable and how to transform their internally facing or internally looking analytic models into ones that are much more globally kind of heads up. This often involves new architectures to ingest these new kinds of data sources, and of course new analytic models that take into account external leading drivers. So that's part of it. And then the other part is helping companies think about how to digitalize offerings that have been very kind of mano a mano, face to face, require hands-on. How do you take that kind of offering and convert it into one that is just as valuable, if not more valuable, from a distance perspective? So that's important as well. And then a lot of companies have lost certain income streams. So we're working with them to identify new value streams, particularly from their data assets. Most of my book involves the topic of data monetization. And while most people think data monetization, when they hear the word data monetization, they think about selling data. But monetizing data, or really any asset, goes well beyond just selling it. There are a variety of ways to generate measurable economic benefits from information, especially because it has some really peculiar and awesome economic characteristics.
Absolutely, and I think it's a good time to delve into the origins of the book. So you referenced it there, a big focus on data monetization. So let's just take us through the process of when you first had the desire to write a book. What was the trigger to give you the push to do so? What was the writing process like, and what impact has it had for you professionally?
Right. Well, in my first go, I'll give you the genesis of the Infonomics idea. Well, I was with Gartner the first time. It was during 9/11, and some clients in the aftermath of the attacks started contacting us, lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but also the loss of their data. Remember, this was in the days before a lot of cloud and offsite backups, and companies had their backups on site, and they were lost in the destruction of the Twin Towers. And so naturally, what they did was contact their insurers for to submit claims for the value of the data they lost. And the insurers said, well, sorry, we don't consider data to be property, and therefore, we can't honor those claims. That caught my attention, and I started scratching my head, wondering, well, goodness, why isn't information property? Isn't it an asset? And so I started pulling open some balance sheets of some companies and learned that that information is non-existent on the balance sheet, and that and perhaps that's why it's not considered property. So that got me to thinking about, what would happen? Maybe this is why companies aren't so good at managing their data, because they don't measure it in any way. The old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure, or you can't manage well what you don't measure well. And since data is not something that's capitalized on balance sheets, it's probably why organizations don't manage it with the same kind of discipline as their traditional assets, even their financial assets, or physical assets, or other kinds of intangibles like patents and copyrights, which are balance sheet assets. And then it occurred to me that, well, an asset that you're not managing particularly well is one that you're not going to be able to monetize or generate value from. And so I think for many organizations, it occurred to me that this is a vicious cycle of not measuring their information, therefore they're not managing it as well as they could, therefore they're not monetizing it as well as they could. So the idea behind Infonomics and my research on the topic and ultimately the book, and now a consulting business, is based on the idea of kind of reversing that curse, or flipping the script to make it more of a virtuous cycle than a vicious one. Yeah.
It's quite an interesting journey to take, just spotting trends to bring it full circle, and also scratch that personal itch of your interest in writing. So for somebody listening who's has an interest in reading content related to this industry, what would be the main takeaways from Infonomics? Obviously, we want to encourage them to get the full book, but what were the main learns for somebody who would be reading it for the first time?
The main idea is that there are no new ideas, and I'm the first one to admit that Infonomics is really about adopting and adapting well-honed ideas from other disciplines and applying them to information. The concept of asset management is well defined, well articulated. There are ISO standards for how to manage physical assets, how to manage financial assets, how to manage human capital. And any and all of those can and could and should be applied to the management of information, everything from inventorying it to dealing with planned versus unplanned maintenance. All of those things can be applied to information in ways that, we information professionals, and I'm as much to blame as anybody, have been inventing this stuff over the decades, and it's been out there for the taking. So there's ways to apply ideas about how to measure, how to monetize, how to manage information as an asset by applying what's already out there. Even when it comes to measuring information's value, there are established models for how to quantify the value of any asset: the cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach. Why aren't we applying those kinds of approaches to understanding the potential and realized value that our data assets are delivering? Moreover, even outside of financial context, we've developed models for understanding how to quantify the intrinsic value of an information asset based on its quality characteristics, or its business relevancy, or its impact on non-financial KPIs. These are all things that are really important for an organization to know and understand. And those that have used these models that I've developed, engaged in significant wins, like generating hundreds of millions of dollars of additional value for their company by realizing they're not sharing data well enough throughout the organization, putting in place a plan to do so, and generating huge benefits. Or another company realized they had data that they were storing and managing that was costing them more than the economic value it was generating. So they made a defensible deletion decision and are saving millions of dollars of unnecessary infrastructure costs. So, measuring something is really important. And then but I think one of the real kind of the key takeaways is that information has these unique economic properties that other assets don't. Information is often compared to oil, like people say, data's the new oil, right? Well, that reflects that somebody understands that data has value, sure, but it misses the point entirely that data has these unique economic properties, like you can use it over and over again for multiple purposes. You can use it for multiple purposes simultaneously. You can, when you do deploy it, it typically generates more data. So it's what economists would call a non-rival risk, non-depleting, regenerative asset. try that with any other kind of asset. It's not possible. And so business leaders and architects who kind of get that, have gone on to build really tremendous business models for their organizations.
That's incredible, the impact it can have just by laying out a blueprint and the approach. And it's great to hear about so many examples of it being adopted. Switching back to yourself then, look, you mentioned in your intro, you made a conscious decision to move back into consulting and obviously landing at an amazing organization like Caserta. So can you give us some insight into, what you enjoy most about your current role and specifically with Caserta, because they're obviously quite an interesting group, maybe not as well known as a Big Four, but for people who know the impact of Caserta, incredible organization. So what drew you back to consulting and particularly to Caserta?
Well, as an analyst at Gartner, most of your day is spent handling client inquiries, 30 minutes at a time. And as an analyst, you might do 400, 500, 600 of those a year. And advising people on Infonomics and on generating more value from their data, that was wonderful, but it became frustrating in not being able to help them more than advising them for 30 minutes at a time. So I really wanted to dig in with some companies and work with them to build out some of these ideas for the betterment of other companies. It was enough just to talk and write about it for years, but I really wanted to get out there and prove it, and prove that these things can be done and transform an organization. And having that consulting background, I kind of knew what I was getting into. So the things that I really like are getting more into detail, actually running data monetization workshops or developing data literacy programs for companies, or assessing their data and analytics capabilities and issuing really executable recommendations for them. That stuff is really fun. So I really enjoy that. And
then looking at the future of the data workforce, you've worked in many organizations from big, well-known firms to the startup environment. As you look at the role of data analytics, data science within a company like Caserta, speaking to the next generation of aspiring data scientists, analytics folks, or people who may not have yet defined what role they want, what advice or guidance could you offer to somebody who has an interest in this space to help them develop their skill set and ultimately secure a role with Caserta or a Gartner or a similar firm?
Right. So I did some research a few years ago, and we analyzed over 300 MBA programs or similar advanced degree programs, business programs around the world, and found that about 99% of them offer courses or tracks in analytics. And that's wonderful. Okay, so we're going to graduate a bunch of business leaders who know how to perform analysis, right? But only 3% of these programs offer any course whatsoever in data management. So we're graduating a whole crop, a whole cohort of business leaders who know how to manage people, right, and processes and so forth, but haven't a clue how to manage data. We're in the midst of the information age, and to have a business leader not know how to manage data, or not know even the considerations in data management, is really, really unfortunate. Data has long been associated with and coupled with technology. We call it the IT organization, right? I see a day, and almost every week I come across an organization that to some degree has bifurcated its IT organization into separate I and T organizations. The I organization, or data organization, run by a chief data officer who also is a peer of the CIO, who's running the technology side of the business. But there's no good reason today for anybody to even be thinking about the coupling of data and technology. They're independent assets and should be managed independently. That's kind of one of the core themes of my book as well. So I think business leaders or technology leaders of the future need to understand that data and technology are different animals. They're different assets. They're definitely related, but ultimately data is a business asset. And for business people to not understand what data means, where it is, how to manage it, what are different kinds of data, what's the difference between structured and unstructured data, what are the sources of data externally, open data, syndicated data, web content harvesting, social media, et cetera, and how to take advantage of those and how to ingest that data, I think is a huge misstep for organizations and kind of the education system overall. I don't know if I mentioned, but I teach Infonomics at the University of Illinois' Geese Business School, and it's the first business school in the world that is offering a course in Infonomics or information economics. And so we're really, really proud about that. And hopefully we're giving a leg up to future MBA students and Masters of Accounting students in understanding what data is and how to wield it as an asset.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and hopefully we see it more widely adopted because it's critical.
Yeah.
To that point, as our knowledge of the various use cases for data and information becomes broader over time, as does the opportunities and different career paths. Whereas before it was analytics, it was quant and information. Now there's new roles popping up all the time.
Yeah.
As you see this industry evolve over time, what would you expect to see as the most in-demand skills or needs within organizations? So if somebody's listening, they can think to themselves, let me arm myself with these particular set of skills so that I can add value as I come to the job market.
I'm going to mention three particular roles. More may come to mind as I'm going through them. Everybody says that the data scientist is the sexiest job of the 21st century. Okay, well, that's fine. But there's a need for some other, what I consider to be, because I think data is sexy, not just analytics, that there's some other really important roles. One of them is in data curation. So I mentioned that there are a host of external data assets that companies need to use to improve their modeling techniques. It's not enough just to stare at your own data anymore. And so to have somebody in the company who is specifically responsible for understanding what data is available externally, how to get access to it, how to contract access to it, because there's often a contractual need to do that, and then how that data might fit into the organization and its processes is really important. So this role of a data curator is one that I think is really important. Most companies have an entire department dedicated to procuring office supplies, and yet they have nobody dedicated to procuring data supplies. Again, we're in the midst of the information age, and to have that kind of oversight is just, it's irresponsible for an organization. The next is, I think, a data product manager. Most of the ways that data is going to be deployed isn't in creating pretty pie charts and bouncy bar charts and dashing dashboards anymore. It's going to be developing data products that are used internally and externally. Marketplaces or packaged analytics or embedded analytics or data APIs that are made available to your suppliers and your partners. And you really need to take a product management approach to that, to implementing those ideas. So information product manager, I think, is another role that I see becoming really big over the next 3 to 5 years. Then let's take a look at the softer side. Most analytic projects and data projects fail, and I listened to some of your previous interviewees, and they've articulated this as well, that they fail because the business is not ready to embrace or embed or execute on the analytics or insights that have been generated. And this is a change management problem. So companies typically have somebody involved in change management, but they really don't understand analytics or data. So I think the role of a data change manager, or I've heard the term used, a data therapist, I think is really important for organizations. So those who are looking at the kind of the HR or the softer side or the education side, there's somebody involved in change management. And that also involves data literacy programs, evolving towards self-service analytics. There's a lot of change involved in becoming more data-driven. And to not have somebody dedicated to that in your company, even if you're a medium-sized business, I think, again, is irresponsible.
I think those are absolutely agree on all three. In particular, the final one, where in the industry we operate in within technology and data, we have a lot of incredibly intelligent individuals who love getting into the weeds of the information.
Sure.
But we don't have as many folk who enjoy the front and center people side of it, and that's something that creates a massive gap, because we need to have individuals who are going to communicate the value to front office and non-technical in order for it to be successful.
One of your previous interviewees mentioned that it's really important to be able to answer the questions that come up. I contend that it's even more important to be able to ask the questions. And so the data scientists of the future need to be not ones who can just write code and crunch data, but be able to generate hypotheses. I see too many data scientists who can't even articulate the scientific method to me. And don't you dare call yourself a data scientist if you don't understand the scientific method, how to create a hypothesis and how to test it and gather data and so forth. I think it's just, again, irresponsible of anyone to call themselves a data scientist if they're not fully versed in the scientific method and the ability to help business people develop hypotheses.
I think that's a great point to finish on. Doug, this has been excellent. Listen, really appreciate your time. Great to learn about your background, the origins of the book, and some of the interesting work you're doing at Caserta.
My pleasure.
And lots of amazing advice here. So thank you again.
Thanks so much, JP. Great to be with you.
Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.